Tony?
Yes.
Whoever sits furthest back takes notes. Can I have a volunteer to take notes? Sorry?
I saw Mike raise his hand.
Oh, well, Mike is going to be up on the stage, so some other idea? Hello. Yeah, the clicker doesn't work. Is it supposed to work with this?
Is this PowerPoint or PDF?
No, this is the browser. It's not supposed to work? Never mind.
Yeah, it should work. That one isn't working either, the one on the next one.
Okay. Yeah. So it's an academic.
The check on it.
It's not important.
All right.
Sunday actually, Sunday afternoon.
Saturday, the security workshop.
Is that one in Stuttgart? Yeah. I was spent a few days in Berlin with one of our teams over there.
Okay.
Took the train down from there, so we should be right.
Yeah, we took the train from Stuttgart, changed the
All right, good morning.
Morning.
We do need a minute taker.
Where did you say, didn't you say something earlier? That the furthest person's back?
Yeah. So, Tony?
Peter, thanks for holding 8 minutes.
Thank you. All right. So good morning and welcome to Secevent. I'm Yaron Sheffer. Unfortunately, Dick Hart couldn't make it this week. People who've just come in, please fill in the blue sheets. There's another one, yeah. Please take a quick look at the note well. Everything that takes place within this meeting is covered by the note well, specifically IPR concerns. So where are we as a working group? Between Bangkok and now, we had an interim meeting planned that unfortunately didn't happen. We had to cancel because authors couldn't make it. We announced a working group last call for our next upcoming document, push delivery. Didn't get enough responses. If I remember correctly, we only had 3 responses to the working group last call, which was insufficient to announce consensus. And so this is where we're at right now. We have a document that's back to the working group, no consensus announced, and we need to understand together what we can do about it. So this is what I plan to do at the end of this session. Annabelle will be talking about the latest changes to the push protocol just prior to the working group last call, and then about the subject ID draft that's moving along. And Mike will talk about the recent changes to the poll protocol. And then we'll talk about process-wise whether and how we want to move push delivery across the finish line. And with that, Annabelle?
Get a clicker.
No, you don't. It doesn't work.
Okay, no clicker then. Fine. Good morning, everybody. My name is Annabelle Backman, Amazon. I am here to talk about push-based set token delivery, as Yaron just said. So just quick run through of what we're talking about here. This is the goal here is to be able to deliver sets via HTTP posts from a set transmitter to a set recipient. The protocol is pretty simple. It starts with a post from the transmitter with a set in the body. Next. And hopefully ends with a 202 response from the recipient. Alternatively, it ends in a failure response. Pretty straightforward. You've all probably seen this before because you've read the spec, right? Where we're at right now, we had an 04 draft published early this year with the working group last call that Yaron mentioned in January and February. And then we had the most recent 05 draft published after that. With updates from the few responses we did get to that last call. Implementations are about where they've been. One update on that is Google has actually gone live with set transmission for risk events for their OIDC clients. So there's actually a live in the wild production implementation of this out right now. Next. So let's talk about what's changed since 03. One of the more significant changes was adjusting the language around the validation requirements. There are a few things that weren't clear there. So you added a couple of statements there. One, to make it explicit that the set recipient should be validating the fact or must validate the fact that they are willing to receive sets from this issuer. So in the example diagram there, the recipient should check the issuer, make sure they know who set.example.com is, set.demo.com. They trust those. They expect to receive sets from those issuers. They like that. They don't know who set.unknown.com is, so they don't want to receive events there. Separately from that, the recipient also needs to validate that they're willing to receive this particular set from the transmitter that's transmitting it. They might want to receive set.example.com sets from Example Corp, but they don't expect that from Demo Inc., so they're going to reject that set. So it's two different kinds of failure modes that the recipient needs to watch out for. Next. The next noteworthy thing is we reworked the error codes. This is based off of discussion from last IETF in Bangkok. We went through the list of error codes and significantly reduced the number, reduced it to the set of 4 that, in the opinion the authors represent meaningfully distinct types of error cases where an automated system receiving this error message might be able to take some useful action based on it. So there's a lot of different ways that a set could be rejected or by the recipient, but it turns out that there's not a lot of ways that it could be rejected where the transmitter could actually do something useful in response to that, other than just notify the administrators that, hey, this was rejected. We don't know why. Something's wrong. So we came up with this this set of 4 cases. Primarily, it's the latter 3 where something useful can be done, and in the first case, the system just has to punt and say, I don't know what to do about this. Next. And then a few miscellaneous changes. There was a comment about language, specifying the language for error descriptions. So we added accept language and content language to support that. And then we clarified some of the requirements around TLS to specifically require at least 1.2 instead of exactly 1.2, and also to require beyond 1.2 whatever latest version of TLS is out there that meets the requirements for the use case. And then we'll ignore that last bit that got copied from a previous slide. So where are we right now? There aren't really any open questions that are before the working group, that are before for this spec. So the question really goes to Yaron's point earlier of how do we move forward on this draft? How do we get engagement and get people to read it, comment on it, decide if it's something we want to push forward with or not? But I guess you want to have that discussion at the end of the time, so we can punt on that for now.
However, if we have any questions around the technical content you shared.
You're not talking to somebody.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
If there are any questions about the technical content, we could take those now. Seeing none, I guess we can move on.
Yes.
Okay. Item number 2 is subject identifiers for security event tokens. Quickly summarize what we're talking about here. A subject identifier is a JSON object that has a subject type and contains a set of claims whose meaning is defined by that type. What is a subject type? Let's look at the next slide. A subject identifier type is just a simple schema for representing or identifying a subject by some set of claims. The use case here is that in sets, we sometimes need to represent or identify a subject in a variety of ways, and even within a single use case, we might need to support multiple types of identifiers, so we want to be able to know what type of identifier this is, how are we supposed to process it. So here's an example from RISC. In the account disabled event, within RISC, we have a subject claim in the event payload that identifies the subject via some subject identifier. In this case, it's an issuer/subject identifier. And it's just a way of expressing subject in terms of the issuer and subject claim pair that you would normally see in a JOT. Okay. So O3 draft published a few weeks ago. The one main application we have for this is in RISC, but we expect a lot other use cases for it from anyone who's using SET for the most part. Google and Amazon are both doing this as part of our RISC implementations. Updates from last IETF. By Mike's suggestion, we added a account URI subject type. So this is to represent subjects via an RFC 7565 account URI. And there's an example there. Also from, as I talked about this last IETF, based on the feedback, I made the change to where instead of having this ID token claims subject type as a way to try and handle multiple types or multiple identifiers for the same subject, we replace that with a more generic aliases concept. So in the event where you have a number of identifiers for a subject and you don't know which one your recipient is actually using, you can put all of those together into this kind of meta subject type in a sense, to say, here are the ways I know how to identify this subject. Use whichever one you use. One of these hopefully makes sense to you. So that is new in the spec. And then we also added this brief section on email canonicalization, which basically amounts to, we are not going to try and standardize email canonicalization in this spec because it's way out of scope. And recipients should be sure to apply the canonicalization rules that they normally apply in their system in order to kind of dedupe email addresses to accounts or subjects in their system. And then I think the last thing in here is this note on semantics. This was discussed somewhat last IETF. This is kind of another iteration on trying to clarify the meanings of what exactly these subject types are supposed to refer to. Based on feedback from last IETF, updated these to use this identified with language. So I think that makes it a little clearer. We can happy to have more feedback on that as well. I think the one open item we have is this question of defining a JOT claim for subject identifiers. This is something that I think Brian suggested. I don't see him here to talk about it, unfortunately. But the suggestion is basically that we define a claim in the JOT claim space to generically represent a JOT subject, the subject of the JOT as a subject identifier. This would be presumably as an alternative to the existing subclaim, which is just a plain string. An alternative subject or sub-ID claim would be, its value would be a object that is a subject identifier. I think this is something that was brought before the working group, raised on the list. There wasn't really any discussion. I'd be happy to hear opinions on it now.
John Bradley, Yubico. This actually came up at the security workshop last week. Vittorio has an almost identical use case for JOT access tokens, probably not surprising. So I suggested that he also have a look at this. So it has, the need for such a thing has come up in other contexts besides just SET.
The need for a subject claim that would be like a subject identifier?
A subject identifier not in the scope of the issuer.
Okay.
Ben Kadek, I guess one thing that we would probably have to keep in mind if we did, specify such a standard claim is, how is it going to interact with sub? Like if they're both present, does this one take precedence? What happens if you send such a thing, where both sub and the new thing are present to somebody who only understands sub? There's just some educations to make sure that we think about and write down.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a good point. I think at the very least, some language around when and if you should send both would be helpful.
Actually, the more types we define, I think the more aliases we're going to see, because the sender doesn't always know what the recipient understands, so they might well send both an account URI and the subject issuer or stuff like that. Even, God forbid, email canonicalization, they might send different things just in case. Regarding this one, I really don't like the fact that we define it by syntax versus semantics. I don't have any problem with the JOT being the subject, but I think we need to define the semantics and probably at least some of the contents of this JOT.
I think that the problem is that JOT defines sub specifically as a string. So if we want to have anything more complicated than that, then we have to have, or we're either violating JOT or we're defining a new claim for that.
So I guess we should define a new claim, or if there's something around already, let's use it.
I don't know that there's anything else around already that would fit. This is kind of an alias. I don't see it as being mutually exclusive to sub. So in the example of an access token, that Vittorio had was that you're using Google to authenticate the person to an AS. The AS may have a subject in its scope that it knows the user by, but it may be useful to the RS to also know that your foo@gmail.com was the original federated authentication. So essentially, I think thinking of it as an alias, this is what somebody else knows the person by, as opposed to sub, which is what the issuer knows the person by, person or thing.
Yeah, I think would be safe to say that in the event that a JOT contains both sub and whatever claim this is, that they must both identify the same principal. As long as that's the case, then there shouldn't be too much in the way of confusion as far as how do you process that and which one do you prioritize.
Then, Kate, a different topic. If you could go back 3 slides, I think. And my apologies, it's been too long since I actually read the draft.
Shame.
But when we do have an aliases array like this, that give sort of different ways to identify the same actor, are there any privacy considerations that we might be like exposing some identifier that they didn't want to be exposed?
So if memory serves, there's still in the specs some language around that, around privacy considerations, that a transmitter should not be should take care when transmitting subject identifiers to make sure that they are not revealing information that shouldn't necessarily be communicated or that shouldn't be shared with the recipient. I think there's a section in there that specifically mentions that in some cases even a subject identifier itself can be perceived as sensitive information. So I think we have guidance for that in the current draft.
And in fact, Ben, if you have a better or more specific idea than this vague language, that would be appreciated.
Any other questions or comments on subject identifiers? Seeing none, I guess we can hand it over to Mike.
Good morning. I'm Mike Jones from Microsoft, and I will be talking with you about the other delivery draft, which is based on polling. Next. So what is this? This defines a way to poll for events, which is something you might use if you're in a context that you're not able to push them, maybe because of connectivity or firewall relationships. This complements the push delivery draft. You could do one or the other or both, depending upon your use cases. Next. So what's happened since we last met our heroes? I did a major editorial pass, mostly continuing to simplify the exposition. The precursor draft that we started with was pretty wordy, and it's not wordy anymore. We also better aligned the language with both the security event token draft terminology and the terminology used in the push draft. I and others had made a bunch of review comments on push, which Annabelle applied, and I'd applied some a few drafts ago, and this sort of catches the language up in the poll draft to what's in the push draft. The one tweak I made is I pointed out 2 meetings ago that there was a strange interdependency between the semantics of 2 fields where if one had a certain value, you ignored the other one. And that just complicates implementations and thinking about it. And in fact, the case where it used to be ignored did make semantic sense. So I decoupled the semantics. Almost no implementations are going to change as a result, I believe. Finally, I did something which I'd also suggested for the push draft, which is it used to say that TLS is required, and that language has been softened to say that if there's PII, you have to encrypt it. You could do it with JWE, you could do it with TLS, you could even do it with both, but tried to get it, what are we trying to achieve, rather than saying this is the mechanism you must use to achieve it. Next. Per the discussion that's about to occur, I will note that this draft has a normative dependency on the push draft. And so in order to finish this, it would be tremendously helpful to also finish the push draft. Next. So this is now a chair conversation, but I don't see anything left to do on this other than working group last call. And as long as I have the microphone before I sit down, I'll say two things about push. One is I believe that Adobe also has an implementation in deployment as they're receiving events from Google. So that's another implementation in the wild. And I was one of the recalcitrant ones that didn't produce a working group last call feedback on time. I did eventually pop it to the top of the stack and produce a detailed review, which Annabelle acted upon. And I think there's others that we could cajole into doing a review of some kind to move this forward. But now I'm being an individual and editorializing. So that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions about the poll draft or its status or next steps?
So two questions. Yaron Sheffer, do we have any implementations that can be?
That's what I was going to comment on.
Please.
Tony Nadlin, we are using this within Microsoft today, so this is something that we are very interested in. We're using it for directory synchronization processes and stuff.
Okay.
So, and I believe there are a couple other companies picking it up also.
Okay, so Mike and Tony, can you please add an implementation status section to the draft? And then a question about security. You mentioned either JWE or TLS. Are we in sync between poll and push on this?
We are.
Almost. The one difference in push is the requirement for supporting the latest version of TLS that meets requirements. That language isn't in poll.
Yeah,
but
that's something that I need to, in the next minor revision, sync that language, because you did a better job than leaving the existing language.
Yeah, I think there's no intentional difference between the specs at this point.
Correct.
All right. So with that, let's go back to the push protocol, and I would like to hear from the room if there are other ideas. The chairs sort of exhausted their ideas by opening a working group last call, very traditional IETF, waiting for people to chime in, seeing nobody, and despairing. So I believe the working group is actually empowered to come up with our own process to declare the work ready for publication. But I'd like to hear a proposal for an actual process where we can make sure that everybody is on the same page, that we have enough interest in the room to move forward.
Ben Kadek, as responsible AD, just to clarify, it is completely up to the chairs how you want to determine that there is or is not consensus. The only caveat there is that if you do something really crazy, you're probably going to get appealed. But, we are definitely open to hearing suggestions for things the working group can do to give you more confidence that we do have consensus.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that other working groups have often done is use the opportunity of such face-to-face time to try to elicit or draft volunteers to do additional reviews. So I don't know if there's those in the room that would be willing to sign up on the spot to at least do a skim review and make sure that things are sane from their perspective. For instance, Tony Nadalin could do that.
I'd be curious to see if there's people in the room, or in the working group in general, but particularly in the room since we can see them, who have reviewed the spec and did not comment on the working group last call because they had no comments.
Or in fact, people who think that the draft is not ready or should not actually be published.
I can answer the first one. I have read it. I didn't find any issues, and I'm too lazy to comment on the list. But who are you? John Bradley, Ubico.
So that's a +1 to publish?
Yes, I thought that was what we were doing, which is why I wasn't motivated to make extra comments on the list.
Can you please, before the session ends, so before 11, chime on the mailing list with a +1? That's all you need to do. Anybody else?
So Ben Kadek, another thing we can do is if we have people that we know have implemented this, we could twist our arm a little bit and say, can you look this over? Does this match up what you've implemented? Because if people are using it, that's sort of an indication that they think it's worth publishing.
Probably, and in this case, I wouldn't worry too much about multiple people from the same organization. We shouldn't overdo it, but it's not terrible.
Mike Jones, I do know that Adam Dawes at Google was one of the ones who said, we're using it, please publish. Adam Dawes, who's identity group lead at Google.
He said that on the list.
Yes.
Yeah, he actually went public, yes. But I don't believe we heard from Adobe, for example.
Do you know who the Adobe?
No idea.
I was going to ask, does anyone know who the Adobe contact is? Maybe I could ask the risk people and probably find out.
Mm-hmm. And in general, I think the risk group should be interested in moving this thing forward.
Yeah.
So again, there's no problem if people who are not regulars go on the list and say something. So let's try in the next month or so to get it to a close with a few more people saying, I've read it and it's okay.
Ben Kadek, I don't even know if you're going to need a full month. You could be able to do it faster.
2 weeks? Risk people? Anybody else in the room who's willing to read this document and publish a review, even a high-level review? John? Yes? No? No? Your name, please. Thank you.
Just to clarify, are we asking people to review push, pull, or both?
We're asking people specifically to review push.
Thank you.
And
So one note on implementations, Adam Dawes did comment on the list that Google has it in production.
yes, okay, Mike, back to your question about the poll protocol. Any opinions in the room whether we should move the poll protocol immediately to working group last call? Tony, is that a yes?
Yes. Tony Nadlin, I think we should move this to last call. Based upon it actually working and deployed and stuff, so we have some reference that what's in the spec actually works.
I think my only question about it is whether we have interoperable implementations. Is it Microsoft doing this with Microsoft, or do you have other partners that you're using it with? I don't necessarily know that's a blocker. It's just something for us to consider.
Yes, we do, but I can't disclose at this point in time who are, because,
I trust you.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's as an individual or working group chair, I think we should actually wait with this until we have closure on push, because there are more constituents for the push protocol, as well as push protocol is anyway a dependency of the poll protocol. So I'd rather wait for these few weeks, get more people to express their opinion on the push protocol, and then move forward to a working group last call.
Mike Jones, I kind of disagree with that procedurally, because in terms of motivating human beings to do the work, if people are motivated to work on the poll and we tell them, by the way, we need reviews for push to finish poll, you're more likely to get push reviews. Whereas if you're waiting for push reviews and then saying, then we'll consider poll, we don't have the same forcing function to get people to review both.
So in fact, since we have this dependency, people who review push should know that they're also contributing to poll, plus there's nothing stopping them from reviewing poll, and given the procedural changes that we're making, these reviews will actually count when we get to the more formal working group last call.
I don't see any reason not to move this to last call along with the push, and have them both at last call, so we get the proper reviews that we need on both of these guys.
Other opinions?
Ben Kaduk, no strong opinion, but sometimes it is convenient if we get a group of documents together that's sent to me, and then we can put them out to IETF last call at the same time, so reviewers can maybe have a little bit more context when they're reviewing both of them together. But it's not, I don't think it is a huge issue in this particular case. So if you still think that you want
I
to
still do, actually.
I'm not going to tell you to not do that.
Okay, so speaking for the chairs, we will hold on poll and we'll target to have a working group last call later, so before the next IETF. I do hope to be done, to get pushed to publication in the next month and then move forward with poll. And with that, I believe we are done. Thank you, everyone.
Annabelle, practically, if you see stuff that I haven't finished updating, just point it to me or put it in the submit a pull request if you want.
Yeah, I'll do, I did do a pass over poll, just to make sure that we're seeing all of those
Yeah.
things. I almost feel like the encrypt or use transport layer security should be like in a referenceable BCP or something, because it's like, it's the same guidance
It happens
across so
everywhere,
many
but-
different places.